You're guilty, you did it, and we know you did it. Hello, I'm Cappy, and welcome to the channel. Today we're talking about police interrogations. They're some of the most dramatic displays of effective psychology tactics that we know of. The question is, do they produce the desired outcome? In fact, police detectives are so good at getting confessions from people that they sometimes influence the innocent into confessing their guilt for crimes they didn't commit. In this video, we'll find out the main strategies used by detectives and the history of police interrogation. The modern day psychological techniques that we're familiar with today are actually around thanks to massive reform during President Hoover's day. Up until the mid-1930s, you see, police were using the old third degree. They'd hang suspects out windows, dangle them from 10 stories by their ankles, dunk their heads underwater, and routinely punch them across the face. Tell us what you did, see? Else you'll catch another bop from Eisenhower and Patton, see? There was a huge rebrand across the nation. Cops went from being this kind of rough figure to advanced practitioners of law enforcement science. Hoover said, quote, "Third degree methods, an ill-trained officer might think perhaps a severe beating will force a confession, but the trained officer, schooled in the latest techniques of crime detection, will think otherwise," end quote. So whenever people complain about the modern day psychological interrogation tactics being unfair or too prone to coercing innocent people into confessing for crimes they didn't commit, I'd like to point out that I'll take that any day over a physical beating. It's only because we don't have anything better right now. In 1962, John Reed came out with the Criminal Interrogation and Confessions First Edition. Reed was a master. He extracted over 300 murder confessions during his day. He called their method, that is still used to this day, like a hunter stalking his game. And if you watch police interrogations, you'll see it's exactly like that. Watch enough interrogations and you'll see cops are essentially following a script. They have some very effective canned responses, which are from this style. And if they know when to say their lines at the right time, they can easily get a confession. And the goal is to back the suspect into a corner with their own words versus the evidence they have. However, they can even use evidence that they don't have, like lying about polygraph results. Then, like clockwork, you'll see the interrogators begin to minimize the crime to the suspect. They console them by saying they understand why the suspect committed the crime. Actually, they would have been crazy not to commit the crime. They say things like, "If I were in your shoes, I would have done the same thing." This gives them a psychological out. Lies are allowed because the police believe these types of tactics are unlikely to make an innocent person confess to a crime they didn't commit. In the United States, around 80% of people waive their right to silence. I'm assuming they do this because they don't want to appear guilty and they want to be helpful. And 9 times out of 10, that's probably the safe thing to do. Between 40 and 55% of suspects will confess to a crime during interrogation. Another favorite police technique is to do the good cop, bad cop routine. It's so well known today, even criminals are familiar with it, but good detectives still use it because even if you're aware of this routine, you might not notice it happening to you in the heat of the moment. One detective will be kind while the other is very aggressive and accusatory towards the suspect. Maximization is a technique where the police attempt to scare the suspect into talking by giving them an idea of all the horrors that they're gonna have to suffer if they're convicted in a court of law. Fear is a great motivator. I think a big reason why people find interrogation videos fascinating is because it's a study of human nature at its most dramatic point. We're analyzing the extremes that people are capable of going to when lying about murder. Even in the face of such high stakes, some very basic things can help tip the scales into the police's favor. Humans are more likely to talk with a person who looks like they do. The layout of an interrogation room is designed to make a suspect uncomfortable and feel powerless. It's always a small, soundproof room with 2 or 3 chairs, a desk with empty walls. Straight from the manual, it says to seat suspects in an uncomfortable chair. The detective will, at this point, try to develop a rapport by suggesting they have similar interests to the suspect. They'll be observing the suspect during this phase to try to gauge kind of a baseline. And this is the control element for the interrogation. They want to see how the suspect answers questions that are obviously truthful. They will then compare these reactions to later, more stressful questions. The detective will move on to the confrontation part of the interrogation at this point, where they will confront the suspect with evidence against them. They're looking for indicators of guilt during this period of time. If the suspect, let's say, changes their story or is fidgeting, these are tells, visual tells. The theme will then be developed during this part of the interrogation. So the police will offer a story, kind of a narrative, as to why the suspect committed the crime in the first place. They'll even offer up excuses as to why the crime, in some sense, was justified. This can be very effective when done correctly.
So you don't regret what happened then? This is, for you, this is kind of, it's a little bit cathartic.
I had no idea it was gonna end up like that. I didn't want him to die today, I just wanted him to feel pain.
So while detectives might have a script, it's up to their keen awareness of human nature to employ this script correctly. For instance, the detective needs to recognize if their particular suspect is apt to blaming the victim, or are they more open to reasoning that the crime was justified. All the detective needs is the suspect to admit guilt of the crime. If the interrogator is good, they'll be able to pick up on the subtle clues of which line of reasoning is sitting best with the suspect. Assuming the suspect is guilty, then the police detective will be looking to pick up on these small clues, like if the suspect is nodding their head in agreement to a particular narrative theme. If the suspect isn't responding, then the detective will try a new theme, a new story, until they find one that is effective if they're able to. Stopping denials is an important phase, and it's where the detective puts an end to those cries of innocence. Enough with the denials. The detective here always lets the suspect know that any denials of guilt are useless and only increase their confidence of the suspect's guilt. The detective will interrupt any attempts at denial, and they'll know what the attempts at denial will look like because they've been listening to this story. The confession. This is the final stage of interrogation. Assuming these techniques have worked, the interrogator has the suspect write out the confession and state it on videotape. There are promising new methods like the Higgs method being tested out by the LAPD, where it's less confrontational and more conversational. They put more of an emphasis on getting new information, extracting new info from these interrogations, instead of the goal being simply to get a confession. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, Chris Cappy. Please let us know in the comment section what you would like to know more about within the crime realm. Also, check out the great 2016 article written by Robert Kolker at Wired.com on this topic. It's where we got a lot of our information. Also, HowStuffWorks.com wrote another great article that outlines how police interrogate. Remember to subscribe right here and check out more of our videos.